what? Like, are we all just idiots and Robert MD is like the shit? Like, alrighty, so today we are debuting an episode that we recorded. When did we record that? In like January, early January?
Yeah, one of our first episodes. I think it was supposed to be episode 2, so yeah.
It was, yeah. Oh man, this might be a little cringe then. We'll see.
It's okay. Just bear with us through it, okay?
Yeah.
It'll be better. I promise.
Yeah. But it is cool because we do drop a tool. I'm dropping the RebindMultiA tool, which I've had pending since we recorded this episode, and I've been wanting to release it. So that'll get released today. And then, we just talk a little bit about blind SSRFs as well. Not blind SSRFs, headless SSRFs. And yeah, so should be a pretty good episode. Forgive the audio quality and unrefined speech patterns, which, I like to think have been resolved now.
Yeah, no, that was way back. We didn't even have nice mics. We didn't have.
I didn't have a
anything set
dynamic
up.
mic then.
We were just like, let's record this thing. So
yeah. But
cool.
All right, before we jump into that, let's talk a little bit about, we had some news that we wanted to cover from this past week or so. And yeah, Joel, what you got?
Yeah, so Truffle Security, they're back with XSS
Every episode,
Hunter.
man.
Every episode. Hopefully this is the last of the drama. It's not really drama. It's essentially resolution to the drama. So
yeah.
This actually happened like literally. I think this video came out the day that we recorded our last episode, so we didn't quite get to sneak it in there. But essentially, Truffle Security, for those who don't know, there was a little bit of drama that had gone on. They took over XSS Hunter from mandatory, and they released their own version of it that was new and improved, all this kind of stuff. They announced that there was some really interesting stats that they were seeing, some metrics from people who were actually using it, and that raised a lot of red flags within people from the community, being like, oh, why are you looking at our data? Why are you looking at these metrics? Are you, how are you knowing all this stuff? Are you looking at our payloads? Are you looking where it's popping? All that kind of stuff. The TLDR is that, no, they weren't. Technically, that was always possible with XSS Hunter, even the version from mandatory. Truffle Security did a talk at DEF CON, I think DEF CON 28, so maybe a year or two ago. That was basically discussing all of the current problems with XSS Hunter and all that kind of stuff. And essentially, because of the backlash from the community relating to these metrics that they released, which were anonymized when they were pulling these metrics to begin with. However, because of the backlash, they sat down and they added end-to-end encryption. They were like, okay, this is something that we need to do. This is something that we know has been an issue. This is the flame that ignites the flame under our butt, right?
Yeah, dude, I love the video because he's like, all right, bumping that to the top of the to-do list, Yeah.
He just like shows a close. He just like schedules out like 10 days, just like sits down and does it.
Oh my gosh.
So,
yeah, no, it's sad though too, because like you said, it was originally possible even from the very beginning, with the other XSS Hunter, and mandatory is a good guy, but it's always been there. The capability has always been there. So, and it's open source, so it's not like you don't know that. So yeah, a little bit of an overreaction there, I think, from the community, but I'm glad to see that it spurred the end-to-end encryption feature implementation. That's definitely a win.
Yeah, 100%. So now all you have to do, just go on XSS Hunter, and you can put a PGP key in there, and any payload that pops, it's going to automatically use that key to encrypt the data that gets sent back, and then only you can decrypt it with your PGP key. So
nice. That's good.
I think it's a great solution, and it's nice to see them rapidly addressing those concerns from the community. And as always, if you still aren't sure about it, aren't feeling great, it's totally open source.
Just host your
it
own
yourself.
Instance.
Go for it. Like, know.
I wonder if any of those big providers that have explicitly banned it, I wonder if they're going to roll back on that if you are using PGP encryption, or whether you're still going to lose your bounty.
Yeah, that's true. I hope it's not like permanent damage, so to speak.
Yeah.
Because I know there was like some immediate backlash, and we mentioned that we both saw a couple programs send out messages to hackers and be like, hey, if you're using XSS Hunter, it needs to be a self-hosted version. We don't want it going through, a centralized version, which is kind of a weird stance to take because they didn't have that stance all the while that XSS Hunter was under mandatory, but whatever.
But yeah, okay. Well, hopefully that gets fixed. It would be nice. It's very convenient. It's a very convenient tool. For all of that, I don't have an XSS Hunter instance set up. I've got a little Slack ping callback thing that I use for some of these things, but it would definitely be nice to be able to use the hosted version.
Yeah, 100%. And now that the encryption is there, I think I'll just keep using the hosted version.
Yeah, same. Yeah.
Cool.
Let's see.
You want to talk about the HackerOne World Cup real quick?
Oh yeah. Okay. So HackerOne announced on Twitter, I want to say last week, that the HackerOne World Cup is coming up here soon. And in order to participate in that, if you're interested in that, just to give a little context, that is a hacking competition that HackerOne holds each year. And you get representatives from each country, and maybe sometimes multiple representatives. And you're hacking together on specific targets. This year it's going to be specific targets. Last year it was any target, and accruing points. And then the winners of those competitions get a bunch of awesome perks. Joel, the cat, man, the cat.
I wasn't gonna address it.
I every time I see it, it's just I get distracted. So definitely check that out if you're interested. And the way to do that is we'll put a link down in the description. You go to the brand ambassador program page on HackerOne, and there's a list of ambassadors. Yours truly, Mr. Rhino Raider, Justin Gardner, is the one for Virginia. So if you're in the East Coast, feel free to reach out to me, and I'll get you in the right chat. We'll be releasing this video on Thursday, the 2nd, and rosters are due Friday the 3rd. So fill out the form right away. DM me, and I will get back to you as soon as I possibly can. Hopefully we'll have some signups for that. We've got a full roster already, pretty much, but I think there's some talk of splitting out another team. So definitely don't let that inhibit you from checking it out.
Yeah, we're giving you a lot of runtime. One day, but
one day. So get on it right now.
We have been trying to hype this up on Twitter and retweet it around and stuff. So if this is the first time you're hearing about it and something you're interested in doing, make sure to check out the link below or check one of our Twitters. I'm sure it's in there somewhere. Or just Google HackerOne brand ambassadors.
Yeah,
and it should come up. And just reach out. There are at least in North America, there's 4 in the U.S. and 4 in Canada, and I think. Each sort of region has at least 5 or 6. Some of them have even more. So definitely reach out if that's something you want to participate in.
All these people should have their DMs open too. So yeah, for sure. I know I've signed up. I know a bunch of other people that we like to hack with have signed up. So U.S. is looking strong this year.
The U.S. has a pretty strong team.
It's pretty stacked. I know that it's like. To be fair, though, for the U.S., we have a lot of really strong hackers that I think are going to be hitting it really hard this year. But I think last year it would have been, it was a little bit more skewed towards people that can do wide recon because any program was in scope, right? And so, you've got your hard hitters from Canada, Mr. Today's new, and then the other big recon hitters. So I think it should be. I think we've got a good shot at it this year from the U.S.
Yeah, I'm pretty stoked. I remember from the program side, I was seeing a ton of reports last year, and I was like, what is this thing that's going on? So I'm very stoked to get to participate this year.
Any word on whether your company is going to be participating in the?
Nobody's reached out to me, so. Okay,
all right. So we know one target is not one of the targets. We're narrowing it down.
Yeah.
All right. What else we got here on the dock? ChatGPT APIs. Yeah.
Yeah. So this is something that we always like to talk about, AI stuff. ChatGPT's APIs are now out. So I think you probably have seen in some of the mainstream social media apps like Snapchat and Quizlet and I think TikTok and a bunch of other ones have already ahead of time. They've integrated with the ChatGPT APIs to try and increase user engagement, all that kind of good stuff.
Wow.
So yeah, it's now available to the public, and I'm really excited to see what this is going to do. There's always been some unofficial API clients, we'll call them, that, that used the ChatGPT stuff and made it possible for you to script ChatGPT stuff before it was really publicly available. But now it's actually available. The official API is out, and from what I've heard, it's actually not that expensive. So if engineering or development is something that piques your interest, go check out the OpenAI blog and maybe code up some cool security tools.
Dang, look at this. It's like
ChatGPT.
a fifth of a cent for 1K tokens.
Wow. That's pretty good.
Dang, that's
I don't know what
good.
I don't know what one token means. If that's like
1K token,
or
1,000 tokens. I think that's one query.
For one token.
Yeah, I mean,
Wow.
I guess I at least I envisioned it like those little tokens in the arcade, like you put it in, you play the game, sort of vibe.
Dude, that's awesome.
That would be
cool.
That'd be pretty sick if it was that cheap. That would be amazing.
Yeah, that's awesome. It's really great to see them finally polish out the product to a point where they're ready to release it to the public for like official use. I think we're about to dive into a pretty intense AI fueled era. I don't even
for sure.
Yeah, a lot of stuff is going to be using AI now.
Like you mentioned, some of these programs that are some of these companies that they I'm already talking about it as in programs. Some of these companies that they listed here in this article, we'll link it in the description. They've got bug bounty programs, Quizlet, Snap, Instacart. Some of these they're definitely out there. So definitely go check those out and see if you can hack any of the AI related features, because it seems like they kind of rushed that feature out to ride the wave. So I bet there's some sketchy stuff there.
100%. And I know we had talked about in the past stuff like prompt injection. There are some ML specific bugs, some stuff that's really only going to affect ChatGPT and AI driven systems. So those are probably a great place to focus your time, especially right now as things are developing.
Yeah,
it's kind of a new space. So
could be a cool
take
niche.
Advantage. Yeah.
Like you could be, any of you guys could be the AI vuln guy.
That's true. That's true.
Are
we going to talk about bugs?
Let's see. You want to pick up one of these reports here?
Well, I was going to say, because this is reminding me, like one of my old reports got disclosed.
Oh, really?
A day or two ago.
Oh, nice.
And it was actually a Web3 bug from. When is this? 2018? March 2018. Almost.
Dude, was Web3 even a thing then?
Almost 5 years to the date. March 9th. So
dang, dude. All right. Well, 1st. I wasn't planning on talking about a bug today since we got the other thing, but you take this and go with it, man. I want to hear about
I was just thinking, this. Like, this was like very similar kind of timeline. This was like early on. Web3 stuff was like very new, and also very new in bug bounty. And this was just a very cool DOS that I had found on the RPC server that ran this wallet. So essentially you could send a JSON RPC call to this server, and there was a method in there to reset the server, and it was intended to be for development use, but they had it turned on for production. So on the node
reset,
I totally just reset the node.
Oh,
and it was funny because I didn't really understand the impact way back then, but it's funny because I was reading through it again, and the triager from their side commented, it was like, I haven't verified this, but it looks valid. The node is effectively down.
Oh no. Oh no, that's so bad. Do you remember how you came upon this? Was this just like in the JS files, or did you how did you get this?
Yeah, I was looking in the source code for the RPC.
Open sourced. Nice.
Yeah. So the RPC server was open source, and I was just looking through what methods were available to call, see if there was anything sensitive, or basically this, right? And sure enough, you could reset the whole RPC server with just one call, unauthenticated. Like,
oh my gosh.
Very cool. But this is just reminding me a lot of sort of where we're about to be with AI, right? We're right on the cusp of a new technology coming in. There's not a lot of reports. People are unfamiliar with it. People are unfamiliar with how to use it in a security context and a hacking context.
Yeah.
So now is a great time to be that person, right?
Yeah, for sure.
Focus
it would be
on
really
that.
It'd be really cool. They show in the article like this curl that they do for the Whisper API and for the ChatGPT API. So I mean, if you could leak, just to give some attack vectors out there, if you could inject into this JSON context that they're talking about here, there's a nested JSON context, or if you could leak their auth bearer to OpenAI, maybe even if you could hit different URLs on the api.openai.com scheme or on that domain, via sort of like an SSRF sort of thing, that could be really cool as well. So definitely check out those possibilities.
Yeah, and just spitballing, it also makes me wonder about context. You know how there's like conversations?
Oh yeah, how do they? Yeah.
Right. So like, how do they define like this is the end of a conversation, and that could maybe open up some risk for leaking data from a previous conversation with a different user or something like that.
Go to the blog, and so right where it says the request section, there's a response button as well, right next to Python bindings, and then I think there's like a chat ID, this chat CM PL ID. I bet it's through that.
Interesting, very very interesting. So yeah, see, I would definitely.
I'm gonna go read this API docs. After this.
I'm gonna make note of.
They literally.
We're both making.
I know they literally dumped this API like 20 minutes before we started recording. So yeah, we didn't have time to dive into it too deeply, but it looks really cool.
Super cool. But yeah, so if that's something you're interested in, definitely go check it out.
Yeah. All right. Sweet. That's a wrap, I think, for the first part. Hope you enjoy the episode on SSRF. It was episode 2. It was the second one we recorded, so be kind.
Have mercy.
Yeah, and I'll definitely try to keep that tool up for a little while at least. We'll see how much you guys use it, but yeah, enjoy the episode. All right, cool. Today we are talking about a super exciting vulnerability type. I freaking love this vulnerability type. It's pretty rare. It's pretty hard to find, but when you do find it, it's a lot of fun to test for, and it can really result in some pretty critical bugs. So, Joel, you want to tell the people about it?
Yeah, sure. So, Headless Browser SSRfs, right? So, a lot of times, I think you'll see different instances of this in like different applications you might use, whether it be like you're signing a document or you're generating some kind of like custom PDF or something, right? A lot of times these like custom generation type things, it happens actually within like a web page, and then that web page is rendered into a PDF. And the way that it does that is with like a headless browser. So what we mean by that is like it Chrome, but like no Chrome window, right? So it's like running on the CLI. It like does all the browser stuff without actually showing a browser window. And then you can tell it to, you can orchestrate it to do whatever you want beyond that. So you can have it save it as a PDF, have it save it as a PNG, have it inject scripts, whatever. You can, have it do whatever you want. And that gives you a lot of different power, right? Because it's almost like you have like a client, right? A user who's like doing sort of the things that you want. So if you could get JavaScript in there, your XSS is going to trigger, right? You don't need them to click on anything. And a lot of times those protections are actually a lot lower in those headless browsers.
Right. So for this specific vulnerability, we've got a couple conditions. We need to find a part of the application where they are generating some sort of PDF or generating like a screenshot of like a specific file or something like that, right? And then in order to get the SSRF, in order to incur the vulnerability, we need to find some way to inject HTML or ideally inject JavaScript into that headless browser page, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So that's a little bit of a reach. I mean, it seems like a little bit of a far-fetched vuln type, but it is out there, and I've found it, and you found it, and it, as we'll see later today, Fisher has found it, and so yeah, it's definitely one to be on the lookout. So, how do we go about testing for this? I mean, are we just looking for fields that are injected into the PDF file, and then we just kind of try to inject into those, as far as an XSS goes, like we normally would, or how does that work?
Yeah, so like I mentioned, like a lot of the time this happens in like PDF generation type stuff. I believe the HomSec actually has either a talk or presentation or something about this. So we can maybe leave a link for that somewhere in the podcast description. But so a lot of times it's for like generating a PDF, and I think it's I guess to a bug bounty hunter, it feels like kind of like obvious almost, right? But like when you see it, but generally it's going to be something that like is seems to be generated, right? You know what I mean? Whereas like normally I mean, if it was just normal HTML, you could just load the HTML, right? There's
Right.
no reason to not give that to the user. So like they're generating it into like a document or a PDF or something like for a reason, mostly because they want you to either download or sign
Yeah.
something, or like they need like a copy of it or something like
And
that.
and
Usually it's
and a lot of
go
times
ahead.
you'll actually see, on that note, you'll see actually HTML passed into these endpoints, right? Like, you'll look at the HTTP request and there'll actually be like, you know, you're less than, greater than, like a bold tag or something like that in that HTML that's being passed into the endpoint as a parameter, right?
Right. Yeah. So that's a great way to test it is just like start with HTML tags and see if you can get like either HTML injection or an XSS. The XSS might not be visible because like it
Yeah.
might not render the alert. Right. So like start with HTML,
Mm,
see if you can get HTML injection, just like with like
yeah.
XSS or anything else. Right. If you're fuzzing fields. So start with those payloads. If you see it, like return like a PDF, for example, or like an image
Mm,
with like your bold HTML
yeah.
element like in there, then that's like a great sign that you should like start poking and prodding at that. Maybe try and identify what headless browser they're using, like the specific version or the type, like the what piece of software it is specifically, and then you can take a look at the source code, take a look at other vulnerabilities that have affected that, see if you can exploit it.
Nice. Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. And to your point, we don't actually like normal XSS, we don't have access to or unlike normal XSS, we don't actually have access to like the DOM that's being rendered, right? So we can't just look, right click view source and see where the payload's being injected. We actually need sort of a visual feedback for this, right? So we probably want to try to use something that's going to give, like an H1 tag or something that even might break out of other tags that might, where the data might be rendered, and give us some sort of visual feedback on whether we're breaking out of a tag or out of a parameter, right?
Yeah. This is one of those instances where like having like a malformed payload might actually be kind of useful, just because you can see like some of the mess, you know what I mean, sort of start to show up, and then you'll be like, oh, wait a second, like this might be a good opportunity, and then you can like fuzz it further and poke and prod. You actually have a tool that's relevant to this though,
Yeah,
right?
man. Okay, cool. So I can talk about that a little bit now. Yeah, so essentially, the whole reason we did this episode in the first place was because Fisher hit me up the other day and was like, yo, dude, I've got this headless browser SSRF. And it was pretty much just exactly the scenario that we just talked about, which was like, there's a parameter that's being passed into the endpoint. And that parameter just takes HTML and then just shoves it in a headless browser and renders it. And so obviously, there's not too much to poke around there for XSS, right? You can pretty easily, inject your HTML tag, see it in the responses. That's part of the intended functionality. And then from there, either using on event handlers or script tags. In our scenario, the script tags work just fine. To go ahead and execute JavaScript and then try to get a callback on your server. So, he hit me up. He's like, man, I cannot get anything of impact here because, at the end of the day, an SSRF is great. But if the whole premise of SSRF is that you're pivoting into an internal network, and a lot of times when you get an SSRF, you have to prove to the triager, to the company, that you are able to hit an internal asset, whether it be localhost or the good old AWS metadata instance. For those of you that don't know about that, if your vulnerable server is on AWS, there's this magical endpoint that all of us hackers love. 169.254.169.254. I'll never forget that address. Where you can hit that address and it'll dump back the AWS creds for the role associated with that EC2 server, which is just phenomenal. And then you just kind of dump those into the command line and just log into their AWS account. So that's phenomenal. But in this scenario, he was having trouble finding exactly where we could hit the what kind of internal server we could hit. Wasn't much hosted on localhost. Couldn't hit any internal servers. But here's the crazy thing: it was on AWS, right? So it was like, man, we should be able to do this. But when he dropped
the AWS URL into like an iframe or something like that to pull the data back, it was not having it. So he hit me up and I'm like, all right, like, what are we going to do here? We can't, our time frame was pretty short. We didn't really have a lot of time to do any crazy DNS rebinding. For those of you that aren't familiar with DNS rebinding, DNS rebinding is a technique where you take a domain name and you abuse the time to live on a DNS record to rebind the host name, the domain name, to a different IP address. So, for example, you hit it with an SSRF. The first time it resolves the host, it resolves to, public IP address, your server, totally fine. And the second time it resolves the IP address, it hits, a local server. And that's a common technique. So with that, we didn't have, but that technique takes time in modern browsers because Chrome just sort of ignores that time to live. Time to live on a DNS record. And so it just kind of adds, it just says 5 minutes. It's got to be 5 minutes. And we didn't have that long in the headless browser before they requested timeout. So we were looking around for these other techniques. And Joel, I'm going to hold on. I want to send you this link really quickly. This thing is...
It's funny that you mentioned that because I know like all the time when I'm making new DNS records and stuff, if I ever like make a mistake and I'm like, and I've tested it once before, like it always seems like it takes forever in Chrome, even if your TTL is
it's
wrong.
The worst,
because
man.
Like Chrome ignores it. It does whatever they do.
They just do whatever the heck they want. And they've got enough of the, browser market where they can just be like, yeah, you know what? We're just going to screw with that. Anyway, I just sent you that link, dude. This is so funny. If you look at this link, so this guy, Robert MD, I'm just going to give him a shout out right here, is such a badass. He comments on NCC Group Singularity tool, which is a DNS rebinding tool, one of the like top DNS rebinding tool. He's like, dude, why don't we just, I'm reading this and I kind of get the vibes of like, dude, why are we trying to make this so hard? Like, why don't we just, instead of abusing the TTL on the DNS record, why don't we just have 2 IP addresses for one A record? And if the first IP address fails, it'll automatically fall back to the second record. And I read this and I was like, there's no way that this works, right? Like that would just be too easy. And if, as you look through this freaking GitHub issue, everyone's like, yeah, dude, this isn't going to work, man. And then he just drops like, he's like, this is the POC, it works. And then it just like drops a GitHub gist, like a total badass. So, excuse me, getting over a cold here. So yeah, I realized that and I was like, dang, we got to like check this out. And I recently switched from running Ubuntu as my main OS to running Windows and then using Windows Substitute for Linux. And so I go to test this out and it works. And I'm like, what? Like, are we all just idiots? And Robert MD is like the shit. Like, and it turns out, this is a type of DNS rebinding known as multi-A rebinding, and it only works in Windows, which is a little bit of a bummer, but c'est la vie. However, it works really, really well in Windows. It rebinds super quickly. And so let me just back up real quick and I'll walk you through the actual tech fix, all right?
Yeah, it's actually really interesting that it's a Windows only thing because I know like when I was learning about like DNS back in college, like that they were teaching like, set multiple A records and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And like they always have like fallbacks and stuff. Like even with DNS, there's like multiple DNS servers and all that kind of stuff. And it's kind of interesting to like wonder how that kind of like how the fallbacks actually work and like where they're respected.
Yeah.
Because you'd expect that like Windows would be, I mean, usually I would expect Windows to be the outlier where it's not
right
respecting that type of behavior and everybody else would.
Yeah. So I think it's mostly like a Chrome on Windows sort of vibe, but actually, you know what? It affects other browsers too. I think it affects Firefox and other browsers running on, I'm trying to let me pull up this issue again. Yeah. He said he said it works on Firefox, Chrome, and Edge on Windows. So, I mean, Edge and Chrome obviously are both running Chromium, but it does work on Firefox as well, which makes me think it's like a, Windows DNS internals sort of problem. But yeah, so I mean, pretty much how it works is you've got this page you load up, and when you load up the page, it obviously the computer has to resolve the DNS record, so it resolves to your server, and that DNS record that it resolves has two A records in there. The first one goes to your server. The second one goes to your private server. And when Windows loads it up, it's going to take the priority that you set it as. So if the first one's your server and the second one's localhost, it's gonna respect that. Other systems, Linux and I believe Mac as well, they will not do that. They will look and say they're going to prioritize the localhost instance or the local IP instance. So if you've got localhost is one of them, then it'll just load localhost and it'll never hit the attacker server.
I see. That actually makes sense, because then if you're developing locally, it would hit your local server instead of using the built-in routing.
Yeah, and it kind of makes sense as well from an internal networking perspective, like corporate networking, right? Yeah. So if you've got it'll also prioritize a 10 dot, IP address.
My networking switch does this automatically, but I think this is probably to try and skip that step where if I hit my public IP from home, then it actually just routes internally. It doesn't actually ever leave.
Oh, dang, that's pretty cool.
The router the router just handles it. If you look on your web server, internally, the request will be coming from your internal IP address, not from an external.
Dude, I gotta work on my home lab. I feel like every time I talk to you, Joel, you have this sick home lab set up, and you're look at this crazy automation I have to run all my lights. And what was the name of that system that you had in place?
Home Assistant.
Yeah, Home Assistant. You had so much shit hooked up to Home Assistant. And
yeah, dude, Home Assistant is
I'm
awesome.
jealous, man. I'm running everything off of Google Homes, and it works well, but I don't know. It seems like you got some crazy shit set up, so that's pretty cool.
I mean, I still do a lot of it through HomeKit, but all of the sharing to HomeKit comes from Home Assistant.
Nice.
So
all right, well, maybe we'll have to do a different episode on Joel's super badass home automation setup. But anyway, so the DNS record, it resolves, and it resolves to the attacker's IP address. Then you've got that page loaded up in the browser. You've got JavaScript on that. You've got control of that page. Then pops open another iframe to the same domain, right? This time when the browser tries to reach out to your server, right? It's cached, right? The server will not respond. The server will kill itself. And then when the browser realizes that it's unable to access the server at that IP, it will reach out to the second IP, in this case, localhost, and load that up. Now, because you've got your other page open, and you've got this new page that is localhost but still resolves to the domain open, now we can reach across the iframes because it's the same origin, and pull whatever content we've got out. So that is the whole concept behind this RebindMultiA tool, or sort of technique. And then I kind of built a little tool around it. Yeah.
So the TTL is per record, right? So what do you set the TTL for? When you have multiple IPs, it's still just the lowest TTL.
Well, the TTL in this scenario, it actually isn't ever used, right? Because Chrome just disses you anyway. This is going to throw that away. Normally with traditional DNS rebinding, you'd want to set the TTL to 0, making sure that it refreshes it every single time. But in this one, it can cache it and it still doesn't matter, which is pretty cool. So yeah, this is, I guess I'll go ahead and make this repo not private now. But essentially, I'll be releasing with this podcast, the tool called RebindMultiA. You can find it on my GitHub, github.com/rhinerator/RebindMultiA. And I was going to write a blog post with it. I'm not sure I'm going to write a blog post with it because I wrote a pretty good README on it. So, yeah, just go read the README if you didn't understand my, explanation here, interrupted with my admiration for Joel's home setup.
I will put a link for that down below.
Yeah, we'll drop that in the description. But yeah, so essentially, I took a lot of inspiration for this from another awesome tool by Brandon Dorsey, who now. Or Rebind Network. Have you used Rebind Network, right, Joel?
I think so, but run me through
so we'll go over it a little bit later. I'm actually going to talk about it a good bit in the bug bounty tip section, but it's this concept of like it dynamically responds, dynamically. How am I going to say this? Yeah, so you can build a DNS record that programs how it's going to respond.
Yes. Okay. I do. I've used
Yeah,
this
it's
before.
such a great tool, and I'm really appreciate the fact that he like hosted infrastructure for it. He put it on a server and used Rebind Network, and so Rebind.network, to do that. So took a lot of inspiration from that. So I built a tool, RebindMultiA.com. This is, you guys can go out there and just use this. The concept behind this is, you still need your own VPS. So you're going to have to go and get, your VPS spun up, because obviously you've got to host your payload to do the theft of the data that you need. But the concept should be, you create a record when you run the RebindMultiA tool on your VPS, and it'll respond with so it'll create a DNS server and 2 HTTP servers. The DNS server is going to handle the whole DNS response part of the equation, and then the server will handle one HTTP server will handle loading the malicious page and then killing itself when the second request reaches it, in order to make it fall back to the other IP. And then the last HTTP server, the second HTTP server, will handle fetching handling the data, exfiltrating the data from the browser. So the target, or the actual DNS record, looks like something along the lines of 127.0.0.1.target. So that's the target that you're shooting for. And then you're going to put your VPS's IP in here. In the example on the README, I've got 13.133.133.37. Of course, got to be elite. .ns.rebindmultia.com. So then the authoritative name server for that is going to default to whatever you put in after the NS in the record. That's going to be your VPS, and then your VPS will kind of take it from there and do the whole exploitation.
Yeah, this reminds me a lot of I can't remember the name of the tool, but there was a tool like very similar to this for like redirects and like different like response codes, and you could basically like tell it like respond with like any response code, or like you can put like do a 302 to this specific URL or whatever, and I think you could both do it directly like all through the domain, as well as through like domain and paths, and it was like very similar to this, where you basically just like give it like a single like domain. It's meant to look like legit-ish, like if you can only feed it like a domain, then you can sort of like still get your way around that. I really like the concept of these kinds of tools, because it just makes it really accessible to like everybody.
Yeah, it's so much better. I didn't actually know about that tool, so I'm gonna have to maybe we got to find that one.
I gotta try and find it. I used it ages ago.
That's awesome. And so like the way that I'm doing that right now is just a bunch of like super scrappy PHP files in my web server with all these different types of like, I've got like reader 308.php and reader 307.php. So yeah, that's a good, that's a good bug bounty tip right there, is like when you're looking for, when you're trying to see if you can force a SSRF to follow redirects, definitely try all the different redirect types, right?
Yeah.
I think the first time I heard that tip, I was at a live hacking event, and Mark Litchfield was like, he comes up to me, he's like, dude, this is nuts. Like I had this SSRF, I was trying to exploit it forever. I couldn't get anything. And then I tried a 301 instead of a 302, and it worked. And I was like, are you serious? Wow, like what does the code even look like for that on the server side? Like,
it's so funny.
It's weird, man.
Super weird.
But yeah, so that's the tool. So definitely enjoy that. Let me know your thoughts on that. You can hit us up via Twitter at CTBB Podcast, or info@criticalthinkingpodcast.io, or you can just DM me. That works too. DMs are open.
Nice.
I will say you have to use Python 3.7 because it uses a library that's in there. So you might have to work some pyenv magic. I don't know how to actually say that. Yeah, that's what it should be like. All right, let's see. What else do we want to talk about next, Joel? What do we got on here?
Let's see. So we can talk about. Do you want me to sort of go through it, or we can talk about sort of the RCE?
Yeah. Let's talk about some. So yeah, that's another approach, right? So hit them with the RCE and the headless browser sort of feel.
Yeah, sure. So this is actually something that I use for more than just headless browsers. Like I'll use this on like hardware devices that are running like Android or have like a Chromium instance or something like that. A lot of the times it's a really easy vector to just find a POC for an RCE within either the V8 JavaScript engine or Chromium itself or any of the like Chrome web services and anything like that, and just like throw a JavaScript POC at it and see if it crashes. Because a lot of the times programs will just accept that as is as well. Like you don't have to like go like you don't have to write a binary exploitation payload. You can just be like, hey, I crashed the browser with this valid POC for a version newer than this, and they'll take it.
Yeah, dude, that's super badass, man. I know Alex Chapman at a. I'm trying to not disclose too much information here, but at some point he has done something similar to that. And it just absolutely freaking blew my mind. But he actually went the full way and like wrote out the whole like shell code and stuff like that, exploiting like a type confusion or something like that in V8 is super badass.
Super cool. Yeah. So, I mean, all that stuff is public, right? So, just go to like the Chromium disclose bugs page. I think you could just Google it, but I'm not going to read the URL. But yeah, you can definitely just Google like Chrome.
I'll
like,
drop it in the description.
Bugs. Yeah, it'll be in the description somewhere. And they have like a list of basically just like you can go view the actual like bug that was filed by like the researcher. Includes the POC files. It includes like their automated bot that like retests it automatically and all that kind of stuff.
Oh, dang, that's pretty cool.
Yeah, it's really cool. So you have like definitely a lot of visibility into like basically like how this stuff is working, and then you can just go download it yourself and test it locally and just like try it out and see if it works. So yeah, that's always like a really great thing. Like when you're messing with browsers in general, not even just like headless ones, but headless ones too, but just browsers in general. It's an old browser. Try and crash it. Try and RCE it, because these the JavaScript engines that run within the browsers are like very complicated. So it's really easy for there to be type confusions and like lots of like minor little things that turn into big bugs like happen all the time within the JavaScript engine. And that's like a perfect exploit path because it's JavaScript, right? Like if you can run JavaScript, then you have an exploit path, right? So that's like always a really good vector.
Awesome. Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. And I feel like that is an attack vector that's a little bit separated from the bug bounty community mostly, right? Because like, I mean, obviously there's bug bounty for Chromium, but like browser exploitation, as far as like actually exploiting the browser as an executable, as a program, is not something that we talk about very much in bug bounty, because a lot of the time we're thinking about the attack vectors for web applications, attacking web servers, or if we are attacking the browser, using that to leak information about a current user authenticated on the site or something like that. So definitely a cool piece of attack scope there.
Yeah, I think you'll find that like V8 and JavaScript, it's one of those like JavaScript engine stuff. It's like one of those fields where like generally the people who are like finding a lot of the bugs and like doing a lot of like the really cool research are people who've been doing it for like a long time and are like already super familiar with like this weird complex system that like is the JavaScript engine. And so like when you're coming into it new, like there was a point in time where I was doing a lot of research around like JavaScript engines and that kind of stuff, and like there's just so much knowledge that you have to like catch up on when you're like jumping into that, because like there's just like it's a mess of code. It's like a huge code base, and you just have to like try and sort out like, oh, how does like var I equals 0, like what is that, like that gets like handled by like C basically,
right.
Like it's like so it's very abstract. It's really cool though. If you ever have time to
it's like, a little intimidating to start off researching, to be perfectly honest. Like I've definitely wanted to go down that path before, especially because, like you said, it helps you pop IoT devices too. If you've got an IoT
Yeah.
device that's like a couple patch cycles behind or something like that, it can be really helpful to like just pop the browser and then get RCE on it and dump the firmware or whatever. But yeah, pretty scary, but it is doable. I mean, we've seen people do it, so
every year at Pondo.
Yeah, exactly. Right. Well, cool. So that's the RC inside of the headless browser. So that's another approach you could take. So bringing it all back around, you've got your headless browser. If you see a headless browser, if you see like a PDF generator or something like that in your scope, definitely poke around at it quite a bit, because there's a lot of attack vectors you can go with for that. And I'm actually going to jump back a little bit to talk about headless browser exploitation a little bit more in depth here. Like you mentioned, Nahamsek has a really awesome talk. I want to say it was in 2019 about essentially how to get LFI through headless browsers. And there's some crazy stuff in there about like using a link tag to embed a file in the rendering or of that PDF that happens. And it's like, dang, why does this even work? But it did. And I think a lot of this stuff is dependent on the software that's being used to render this, right?
Right. And that's why I like recommended, like, if you can like poke around a little bit and try and like identify, like start with just like, HTML and like those types of things, just your basic like fuzzing of fields, and see what types of output you get. And then like start searching for like the abnormalities and see if you can get a hit like on a GitHub issue, or somebody like, posting something that mentions what software. Oh, I'm experiencing this weird issue with this software. Like, that happens all the time where somebody's like legitimately trying to use it and they like encounter the same kind of problem.
Yeah, go read
like,
the GitHub issues, man. That's the takeaway from the day. Is like,
yeah.
You might find the next Robert MD who's just like, this is stupid. So
go read the GitHub issues. Exactly.
Yeah. And if you look at the other one that I had here, Joel, was like this write up by Jonathan Bowman, who's a stellar hacker. Love working with him at live hacking events. And essentially he and this is another shout out to the specific, go and figure out exactly what is rendering your PDF. In this scenario, it was MPDF, a specific library. And as he was reading through the docs for this, he found a way to include a specific file in it with an annotation tag. And you're probably not going to have success doing exactly this, but it's important for you to look. It's important for us all to look at the methodology here and say, like, how far he went down that path, right?
Yeah, exactly.
It's definitely, not as sexy sometimes to go in there and read the documentation and like just get super deep and that sort of thing, but you really see some crazy vulns pop out of that.
Well, that was the other thing I was going to mention when we were talking about like all the weird DNS behavior. Is like, I think like a lot of these complex systems, like one big takeaway is like there's almost always like a documentation related bug where like there's something that is like literally documented as expected behavior, and it's not like
okay.
It's not right.
Exactly.
Not okay. Exactly. Like it's like bad behavior that is intended, and they've just been like, yeah, this is how this is supposed to work. But when you come at it from the attacker's mindset, then you like, you can use that in malicious ways, whether it be like, oh, we're just rendering this page. We give it an image URL and it puts it in the page. And it's like, yeah, but you can give it any URL, right? Something like that. Right. So just go read the docs, right? Read the docs, read the issues, like figure out people are like using this. And just like, you'll definitely find something like strange in there that to look at.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, I definitely think that's such a valuable, I dumped that tip on almost every one of those, like, give me a random bug bounty tip, Twitter feeds is like, read the freaking docs. And I think Inti, I actually didn't get the chance to see it, but Inti, I think, did a talk recently on like, just go read the freaking RFC. And that has literally never not paid off for me, sitting down and reading the RFC. So that's another fire one there.
Yeah, for sure.
The only other thing, Joel, that I had in this section about headless browser SSRF sort of exploitation was this piece on and this is kind of sort of like a last resort, right? We don't really want to resort to this, but at the end of the day, they will still give you a medium on an SSRF if you can do internal port scanning with it most of the time. And there is this cool tool by some guy named Avilium. I'm sorry if I didn't pronounce that correctly, but that's what it is. And it's actually a um, WebAssembly port scanner that you can just run in your browser. And before we ran this, before we did this podcast, I tried to spin this up and try to get it to work, and I couldn't get it to work. And I put an issue out there, and he's like, "Yeah, dude, it works." And so I was like, "Okay, all right." And it very well could be like some weird networking that's happening with WSL. That definitely does happen, but he swears up and down that it works, and it seems pretty badass. So definitely something to check out if you're in a situation where you can, where you need to prove internal port scanning or something like.
Yeah, WebAssembly is one of those things that I think is like, it's like a secret hidden little, that's going to come get us soon. You know what I mean? Because like, I think that not a lot of people are really looking at that.
Yeah.
And like, there's a lot of stuff that seems kind of like wild.
Yeah.
I mean, I've seen like people like you compile Doom and like run it in the browser and stuff like that.
Nuts,
you know what
dude.
I mean? So it's like the levels are pretty like I think we're already like there. People just need to like figure out how to use it. And this seems like a good use
and
case.
To your previous point, this WebAssembly is something that's used fairly often, I think, in exploitation of those RCs that we were talking about earlier. You've got to have a pretty good grip on that, which is once again just another arena of deep dive you need to do to be able to fully exploit these things. But I do think it would be really interesting to and I want to say, like, I bookmarked, if I find it, before we release the show, I'll drop it in the show notes. But I want to say I bookmarked a talk that someone did, or maybe like a blog post that someone did not too long ago about like how to get into browser bugs for noobs, essentially.
Yeah.
That is a really high
I
value.
actually do have some things bookmarked here. I'll send you some links.
Yeah, dude, shoot them over. And actually, I found it actually. Jack Hallen. He says, today I'm releasing a 3-part browser exploitation series on Chrome. And I started looking into this dude, and it's really interesting stuff he writes up. Highly recommend checking out his blog. So I'll drop this in the description as well for the episode. But
awesome.
Yeah, just getting a cursory understanding of what all of that looks like, I think would be really helpful, even for web hunters, because you do run into these situations where you're hitting an IoT device or you're, hitting in a headless browser, where this could be really helpful.
Yeah, for sure. Dude, and make sure to send me that link as well, actually. I want to give that a read.
I gotcha. I'll drop it in the chat right now. All right. Sorry for the coughing in the mic.
Oh, dude.
Dude, this cold has held on for so freaking long, man. Like, it's been so annoying.
It's that time of year,
Yeah, for sure. All right. I think that's all we had on content for Headless Browser SSRFs. I'm trying to think if there's anything else. Not that I can come up with off the top of my head. So yeah, now it's time for everybody's favorite segment, which is like random bug bounty tips / interesting stuff to talk about. So yeah, I guess I'll go ahead and start us off with the cool one from Lupin. Yeah, does that work?
Yeah, go for it.
Okay, so I want to say it was Vegas that I talked to Lupin about this over like pancakes at the what is the name of the hotel in Vegas with like the giant pyramid on Luxor.
The Luxor.
Yeah, that was it. We were in the Luxor and we were at like this breakfast place and we're just sitting down and talking about like Headless Browser SSRF and like stuff as we do. And he dropped this fire tip, which I ended up using in a Headless Browser SSRF exploitation not too long ago, which was, a lot of times in these sort of scenarios, you have a certain time frame where you have to get your payload off, in like 3 seconds or something, or the HTTP request times out or something like that, right? And so, of course, in those scenarios, first thing that comes to your head is like, okay, well, I'll just stall the HTTP response, right? I'll just write a little PHP code, return sleep or whatever, and then just, return an empty file or whatever on an image tag. And that works fine and will probably buy you like a couple seconds or whatever. But there's a different timeout, he told me, on loading the body of HTTP responses. And so if you go ahead and you respond with the headers a 200 response, and you give it a content length of 1, and then you don't respond with anything else, there's a different timeout value on how long it will wait for the body of that HTTP response to be kicked back versus the actual just HTTP response itself, which I thought was really interesting.
Yeah, that's actually that's a really good tip. Because if you think about like you mentioned, there's like different timeouts like along the way. There's like the connection timeout. There's like the HTTP timeout.
Right.
There's like all different timeouts like at different places, and they might not actually be defined the same way. And also they start at different points, right?
Yeah.
So
that's a good point. Actually, I wonder if it would be most efficient to try to like optimize all of those timeouts and say something like, okay, we're going to stall the TCP connection for like, if the limit's 3 seconds, like 2.9
as
seconds.
much as you can.
Yeah. And then do that at each step along the way. Stall the HTTP response for like 5 seconds, stall the HTTP response body for like, however long. But yeah, so if you ever need to buy yourself some extra time in that sort of headless browser context, you can definitely use that.
Just empty body content length 1.
Exactly. And then, you'll do whatever else, you're doing in JavaScript on a different part of the page. So that's a pretty cool one. I think it bought me like 15 seconds. It went from like 1.5 seconds to 15 seconds when I tried it. So that's pretty badass.
Yeah, that's really cool. Another one is like Chrome is like super like good at talking to other like Chrome instances. You know what I mean? Like Chromium and all those kinds of things. So like there's a thing called Chrome Inspect. Chrome / inspect, and this plays with like a lot of other things like the remote debugging stuff. And I'll let you talk about that in a sec. But like with the inspect page, you can like for example, if you have an Android device and you have a web view on that Android device, plug it in to your computer, you open Chrome Inspect, you can interact with the JavaScript console on that page on the device, like over USB from your computer.
Dang, dude.
And you can like, inspect element, you can look through the HTML, you can do all that kind of stuff if your phone's in debug mode. So that's like a really, really useful tool if you're trying to like debug, like, oh, what does this page have access to? Or like, where is my code like being rendered on this web view or whatever, you can take a little closer look if you just plug your phone in.
Dude, that would be hella helpful for like trying to enumerate those like special JS handlers that you have sometimes in like mobile app web views or something like that. I don't know if it works in web
I use
views.
it to build my payload all the time, actually.
Oh, really?
Like what? Yeah, because it's just way easier. Like you just open up the page. You don't have to like get your whole exploit all the way. You open the page,
game changer,
open your
man.
computer, start testing your payload until it does what you want, and then you just figure out how to inject that payload.
Dang, I gotta test that out sometime. I wish I've been working on I don't know, I guess I'll say just a certain IoT device, and I freaking cannot get this thing to get into debug mode where I can get any sort of like access to the JavaScript console on it. So I also think it would be really cool. I don't know if this tool is out there. I'm sure it does with like some of the OG. I want to say there was a tool that like would drop a JavaScript shell back to you. But I think it'd be so helpful to just be able to load up a page, right? And then like have another page that it connects to maybe via like WebSockets or even like just a command line thing where you could just run interactive JavaScript when you don't have access to the inspect console. And
you're reminding me, I saw a tweet.
Isn't there something about that? I feel like there was.
Yeah, I saw a tweet like yesterday. Oh yeah, here we go. Broadcast channel. I'm gonna send this to you on
what broadcast channel?
Yeah, I think this is a new JavaScript API.
Oh dang, that sounds.
But it's like cross window, like cross tab, like.
Okay, that's my jam right now. So definitely send that to me. I've been studying recently, like all the different ways you can, reach across various JavaScript, reach like into the iframe. You can do it via post messages. You can do all sorts of crazy stuff. What the heck?
I know, right?
Dude, you just dropping this on me in the middle of a podcast? Like, what the heck?
I know. I saw that this morning on Twitter.
Okay, dude, we got to wrap this up so I can go read this. All right, that's fire. So we'll leave that in the description as well. I wonder if this can be used I wonder if this is specific use cases or if this can actually just broadcast to, if you can, because really one of the problems that I've been trying to solve is like, how do I get, and this is especially relevant in this modern day of like, same site cookies and that sort of thing, where you have to do top level navigation. How do I get access to a tab that I didn't open to send it like a post message or something like that? Because if I could do that, it would be really helpful for a lot of bugs. So this actually looks super promising. I'm definitely going to check this out.
Yeah, and I wonder if you just have to like open that channel, or if you could like brute force it, or maybe if there's a default channel.
Yeah, dude.
Probably some interesting things to look into.
Yeah, no, there's definitely going to be vulns here, right? Because it looks like I'm just, looking at a cursory glance at it, but it looks like they just, define a static broadcast channel. So if you have a static, if it's not something that's being dynamically generated, you can just send messages into that.
Yeah. It looks like it. I definitely got to mess with this.
Okay. Oh, dude, and I just pulled up the MDN on it. It's supported across all of the browsers already.
Oh, really?
Sick,
dude.
All right, we're gonna poke at that. All right, that was an extra bug bounty tip for you today.
Yeah, a little extra one.
Don't snipe our bugs. Don't go find all the bugs in that before we do.
Obviously, Who Now that you mentioned.
Yeah.
So by Brandon Dorsey, that's like a great tool for DNS rebinding. It's just like all in the domain record itself. You just like chain it all together with dots, and you have like one big like subdomain chain that explains like how your DNS rebind works. Super useful.
Yeah.
Who Now?
No, that one's crazy useful. I use this one all the time. It's so nice that he just hosted it and like you don't have to worry about it. But I did at some point, because I need to do some modifications to it, I did spin up my own version of Who Now, and it's super easy to do. So don't let that intimidate you either. I hadn't worked a lot with DNS protocol before screwing around with this, and one of the tools I'll mention in just a second. And so definitely don't shy away from that. It'll help you grow, and it's actually not super tricky.
Yeah.
So yeah, I guess I'll keep it on that same vein. The next one that I had here that I wanted to drop as a tip was DNS Chef, and actually Mr. Tux Racer, shout out to Julian there, showed me this a while back. But this is a great way, and this is helpful in so many contexts. It's helpful in IoT.
Yeah, I just opened this up and I already had the repo started.
Yeah, did you? Nice. Yeah, I use this all the time for creating fake DNS records and sort of proxying through. And it's really great because, like, for example, if you can set your router to have a default DNS and then push that to an IoT device, right, when it connects to your router, then when that you can snipe specific DNS records, right? So it, set your VPS as the default DNS server, and then it'll proxy every record that's not the specific record that you talk about to like 8.8.8.8 or something like that. And then it will allow you to override a specific record, which can allow you to inject yourself into some pretty baller situations when you're writing exploits. So
that's pretty cool. Yeah, I do a similar thing. And I know we've talked about this with IoT devices where you can force a web view to pop up with captive portals. Right? Captive portals. You go to Starbucks. You connect to their Wi-Fi. You got to check the box, right? The little thing that pops up. You got to check the box and agree and click agree, right, before you get internet access.
Yeah.
Well, that's called a captive portal, right? And so like most devices support that. Like it's just part of normal like like Wi-Fi stuff, right? So like on an IoT device, you just give it your own captive portal. You force it to open the captive portal, and it will open a web view that you can run JavaScript in, and you can, it's like, yeah.
Freaking Joel is like dropping all of these bug bounty tips that are not in our notes. And I'm like, dude, like I sit here and I like script out my notes. I was like, oh, I'll drop this tip or that tip. And then Joel has like literally no notes here and just like drops these fire. Oh my god.
Roll out of bed.
That's nuts. Definitely check that out. Definitely helpful. Joel told me about that technique a while back, and I used it on an IoT device, and it worked quite well. So definitely don't forget that one. And I think that's such a valuable piece about cybersecurity content like this, right? Because it's like, if you just like, that's pretty creative, the captive portal. And if you just kind of get that in your head as a possible attack vector, as a possible, beginning of an attack or something like that, you never know when that's going to pop up and when you're going to use it and how it's going to make you grow as an attacker to think like that. So I love that. Yeah. All right. So you kind of touched on Chrome DevTools protocol a little bit, but I actually wanted to talk this out this is not necessarily a bug bounty tip. More of it's like, please go hack this, everybody who listens to this podcast, because it seems really like interesting scope. So I was looking at this, and I feel like this is something that I have not tried very much in the context of headless browser situations, because I'd imagine this dev tools protocol is open on a lot of these headless browsers, because there's got to be some way for them to orchestrate that headless browser, right? So definitely check out dev tools protocol. When you instantiate headless Chrome, there's a remote or -- remote debugging port parameter that you can put in to enable remote debugging on the Chromium instance, and it opens up some really interesting endpoints. Obviously, this one that I'm about to highlight is kind of like a semi vulnerability that I found, but it's not really a vulnerability. And what it is, you know how like browsers have a limitation on like pop-ups, and you can't like pop up like, 8 kajillion tabs, with one root. If you open up remote debugging port, and you hit /localhost/json/new, and you give it as a query parameter, you give it a URL, it will open up a tab, and then it will open up another tab with that URL you defined, right? And so you can pop up 2 tabs and one that you control and one that has a parent or an opener relationship with this /json/new. And so that allows you to circumvent some of the pop-up stuff, which I think is pretty cool. And then there's, obviously the Chromium code is open source, so you can go read through it. And I was just looking at the way that it handles HTTP requests and such. Looks like there's a really ripe attack surface there. So definitely, if anyone's feeling up to it, go poke at that. Could provide some cool attack surface. And I was just kind of perusing through the Chromium disclosed bugs, like you mentioned before, Joel, and they do pay for bugs in that. So
yeah, man, go get a universal XSS.
That would be sick, dude. That'd be so cool. And the other thing is, if you can leak it, if you can figure out how to leak the GUID for these inspect. So, because what it's talking about, the purpose of this is to be able to do remote, kind of like what you were talking about before, Joel. I imagine.
Yeah, it's exactly the same thing, actually. Yeah. If you open the Chrome Inspect tab and you look at there's actually a button in there that says discover network targets, and if you click configure, it shows localhost port 9222, 9229, right? So there's default set in there for picking up those remote debugging instances, and it's the exact same thing. It's just that with Android, you put your phone on debug mode and you plug it in over USB. It'll do all the same things as it would with a remote target.
Wow. Okay. Yeah, I'm looking at that now. That's okay. That makes so much sense. So then you have that remote debugging accessible, and if you can get the GUID, the correct URL for that, then you can control that page, and you can run arbitrary JavaScript on that page, which would result in universal XSS. Really cool attack surface there. Definitely check it out if anybody's into sort of fringe browser exploitation, because for me, as a web hacker, getting into all that V8 stuff and dealing with a lot of stuff I'm not familiar with, a little intimidating, but dealing with a, localhost API is a lot less scary. So I think I'm going to dig around a little bit there, and I hope you guys go and find something interesting there as well.
Yeah, some good research.
For sure.
Awesome.
All right, man. I think that's a wrap. I don't know. You got anything else you want to mention on this episode?
I think that's it for now.
All right. Sweet. Awesome. Well, thanks everyone for listening. And we'll see you next time.
Yeah. Peace.